Ever since my son got married, I've learned that peace comes with a price tag, and mine was outrageously expensive. My sly daughter-in-law teamed up with my spineless son to turn my quiet life into a circus. In 70 years, I thought I'd seen it all, but never children who'd haunt their own mother like ghosts, hurling the nastiest insults right to her face, and then somehow still have the audacity to show up at her doorstep, palms open, begging for favors. Tell me, my dear viewers, have you ever met such masterpieces of hypocrisy? If not, sit down and buckle up because you're about to hear a story that'll make your tea go cold. But before we start, drop a comment to tell me where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share, so the world knows what real family drama looks like. When I look back, it feels like my entire life was divided into 2 chapters, before my only son, Henry, drifted away, and after. I used to be Scarlett Lawson, a senior history teacher at a high school in Oregon. My students said I was strict, but fair. I taught them to look at history not as dates on a page, but as stories of choices and consequences. They brought me apples in winter and notes tucked inside homework, little thank yous that meant more than they ever knew. I retired 5 years ago when my eyesight began to blur and my knees started to ache during morning assemblies. I thought I was ready for quiet days. I wasn't. The silence had a weight I didn't expect. The old 2-story house where I live now is my last piece of a long life built with my husband, Harold. It was valued at around $850,000, though I have never cared much about the number. To me, its worth lies in the creaking staircase we sanded together, the kitchen window, where morning light still falls on the same blue teapot he bought from a flea market in Portland. Harold was a geography researcher, always surrounded by maps and notebooks. After he passed away from cancer, I couldn't bring myself to move a single thing. His handwriting still fills every margin of those maps, tiny trails of thought frozen in time. Sometimes I trace his words with my fingertips, just to remember the sound of his voice, explaining how rivers carve their way through stubborn rock. People say I live alone, but that's not true. I have the hum of my neighbor's laughter through the fence, the chatter of my book club every Thursday evening, and the hands of friends who still invite me to the church charity events. There's warmth around me, yet an empty chair always remains at my dining table. That chair belongs to Henry, my only son. We used to be close, but life and ambition have a way of stretching love thin. He visits less and less now, always too busy, too tired, too caught up. I don't blame him, but there are nights I find myself setting an extra plate anyway, out of habit or hope, I can't quite tell which. Sometimes I stand by the window looking out at the oak tree Harold planted 40 years ago. Its branches are heavy with memories, and beneath it, I still feel him near. I remind myself that solitude isn't loneliness, that peace can live even in an old house filled with echoes. But deep down, I know what I miss most isn't conversation or company. It's the feeling of being needed. Henry has always been a man of big words and short results. He studied law once or so. He liked to remind people, though he never passed the bar exam. Somewhere along the way, he decided real estate was his true calling. "It's where the real money is, Mom," he used to say, leaning back in my kitchen chair with that confident grin of his. For years, he chased what he called million-dollar opportunities, flipping small properties, joining vague partnerships, pitching ideas that always sounded half-finished. But none of them ever quite worked out. Still, he spoke like success was waiting just around the corner, and I wanted to believe him. Every mother wants to. He's in his 40s now, married to a woman named Amelia, who earns more than he ever did. She's practical and polite to me, though I sense a quiet tension whenever Henry mentions needing to borrow a little again. It usually starts with a phone call at night. He begins with soft concern about my health, about how quiet the house must feel. Then comes the sigh, the hesitation, and finally, the familiar phrase, "Mom, I just need a small loan to close this deal. It's a sure thing." The tone is rehearsed, gentle, but insistent. He always promises to pay it back, and I always want to believe him, even as the same story repeats itself every few months. At first, helping him felt natural. What else is a mother supposed to do? But over time, I began to notice how his calls came only when money was tight, how his visits ended right after he got what he wanted. I started to feel less like a person and more like a safety net, a reserve account with a mother's name on it. Sometimes I caught myself waiting by the phone, wondering if he would call just to ask how I was. He rarely did. The last time I said no, his voice turned sharp in a way that still echoes in my memory. He said I was letting money rot in a house too big for one old woman. That word waste cut deeper than I expected. He didn't even realize how cruel it sounded. To him, the home was just a property, an asset. To me, it was everything Harold and I built. After that call, I sat by the window for hours, staring at the lights of the neighboring houses. I thought about how success had made Henry distant, not wealth, but the illusion of it. He kept reaching for something he never truly caught, and in the process, he let go of the one thing that mattered most. Amelia Rhodes entered my life like a pleasant melody that slowly turned into background noise I could no longer ignore. She works as a PR specialist for a luxury supermarket chain, the kind that sells imported cheese and candles for prices that could buy a week's groceries elsewhere. She always looks impeccable with manicured nails, perfume that lingers even after she leaves, and that bright public smile she never quite puts down. People adore her charm, and to be fair, she knows exactly how to use it. When she visits, it's always a spectacle of politeness. She brings pastries from her store and greets me with exaggerated warmth, her voice sweet like syrup. "Mom, I worry about you being alone in this big house," she says while setting the pastries on the table. Her words sound caring, but her eyes wander to the antique clock by the fireplace. The porcelain vases on the shelves, the oil painting above the piano that Harold and I bought decades ago in Vermont. She doesn't realize how clearly I see where her gaze lingers. She looks not with affection, but with calculation. Once she suggested we refresh the house. If I let her reorganize a few things, she said the place would feel lighter, more modern. I could almost hear the gears turning behind her smile. Amelia has a way of phrasing greed as generosity. I knew exactly what she wanted to gauge what was valuable, what could someday be hers. But I didn't confront her. I've learned that silence often reveals more than questions. So I smiled and replied gently, "Thank you, dear, but I like keeping things just as they are." She looked momentarily disappointed before recovering her pleasant tone, as if my words were a harmless quirk of the elderly. Henry, of course, sees none of this. Or perhaps he chooses not to. To him, Amelia is the perfect wife, organized, ambitious, and endlessly supportive. I sometimes wonder if she treats him the same way she treats me, with that careful mix of affection and strategy. Still, I keep my distance, observing, quietly, noting every polite sentence that hides a hint of manipulation. I've taught hundreds of teenagers in my life, and I can always tell when someone is pretending to care. Amelia has mastered the art. After she leaves, the air in the house feels lighter, as if her perfume carried away the last ounce of sincerity with it. I often find myself standing in the living room looking at the objects she admired, the vases, the clock, the paintings, all pieces of my history, not trophies for the next generation to divide. I'm old, but not blind. I see what she's planning, and I'm patient enough to let her think she's the clever one. It started with a gentle suggestion over Sunday coffee. Henry came by unusually warm, smiling more than usual, his voice soft and persuasive. He said he had been thinking about ways to make my life easier. Taxes, insurance, and property paperwork. Those things could get complicated, especially for someone my age, he said. Then he pulled out a few neatly printed documents from a folder, his tone casual, almost tender. Mom, why don't you let me handle these things for you? Just temporary power of attorney so I can pay the bills. Keep things up to date. You won't have to worry about a thing. It sounded harmless, almost caring, almost. But something in his eagerness made me pause. Henry never handled his own paperwork this efficiently before. The forms looked too polished, the formatting too professional. I told him I'd think about it, and he smiled, kissed my cheek, and left the folder on the table, as if he'd already won. That same afternoon, fate sent me an unexpected visitor, Mila Thompson, our old family lawyer. She had stopped by to drop off some charity forms for me to sign. When she saw the folder, she frowned slightly and asked if she could take a quick look. As her eyes scanned the pages, her expression hardened. Scarlett, she said carefully, this isn't a simple authorization. This document gives Henry full control he could sell or mortgage the property without your consent. My stomach tightened. For a moment, the kitchen felt colder, smaller. I took the papers from her and noticed a faint watermark at the bottom corner, a logo I recognized. It belonged to the PR company where Amelia worked. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from clarity. It all made sense now. Henry didn't come up with this plan alone. It had Amelia's polish, her quiet calculation, her gift for making manipulation look like kindness. Still, I didn't confront them. I simply smiled when Henry called the next day and asked about the papers. I told him I wanted to review them a bit more. My tone was calm, unshaken. He hesitated, but agreed, probably thinking I just needed reassurance. That night, I asked Mila to make a certified copy of every page and store it safely in case anything ever went missing. I sat by the window after she left the folder closed beside me. Outside, the evening light stretched across the garden, quiet and golden. I thought of Harold and how he used to say that history always repeats itself until someone learns from it. This time I would. It started subtly, as most cruelties do. After the failed attempt with the documents, Henry and Amelia changed their strategy. Their voices turned gentle again, but their words carried a different weight. Henry began saying things like, Mom, this neighborhood isn't as safe as it used to be. Maybe you should consider selling the house and moving somewhere secure, maybe a senior community. Amelia nodded in agreement, always smiling, her tone dripping with concern. It would be wonderful, she said, to have nurses and neighbors nearby. You'd never have to worry about being alone again. They made it sound like kindness, but every syllable felt like a shove toward the door. Then came the stories. Henry claimed the house down the street had been broken into. A few days later, Amelia brought newspaper clippings of local robberies carefully folded and left on my kitchen counter. Each morning, she'd point to one, shaking her head. It's such a dangerous world, she'd sigh. I started noticing how they always mentioned the word safety, as if repeating it would make me believe I wasn't safe here. I tried to laugh it off at first. I had lived in this house for over 40 years and knew every neighbor by name. But slowly, a seed of unease began to grow. One night, I thought I heard someone trying the back gate. Another time, I found the porch light unscrewed. When I told Henry, he acted alarmed, too alarmed. He said it was exactly what he feared, that things like this happened all the time to elderly women living alone. Meanwhile, Amelia was working on another front. During Sunday service, a friend from the church gently asked if I had been feeling confused lately. She said Amelia had mentioned I'd been forgetting things. My heart dropped. I realized then that Amelia's kindness wasn't meant to protect, it was meant to discredit. She was painting me as fragile, forgetful, unfit to live alone. The plan was clear now: make me doubt myself, make others doubt me until giving up the house seemed like my idea. That night I couldn't sleep. The house, usually my shelter, suddenly felt foreign. The creaks in the woods sounded like whispers, and the wind outside carried a hiss that clawed at old memories. When I was a girl, I used to dream of snakes slithering under my bed, a nightmare I thought I'd long outgrown. But as I lay there, I heard it again, faint but real, the slow, sharp rustle near the window. My body stiffened. The sound of a snake's hiss or something made to resemble it. I didn't move. For the first time in years, I felt genuine fear inside my own home. And I knew deep down that the nightmare had only just begun. It began on a cold October night, the kind of night when silence feels heavier than darkness itself. I was reading by the fireplace when I heard a soft rustle outside the window, faint but deliberate. I froze, listening. Then through the curtain, a narrow beam of light swept across the rose bushes, trembling as if held by an uncertain hand, before disappearing into the dark. My heart raced, but I told myself it was nothing. Probably a squirrel, I whispered aloud, trying to believe it. I even laughed at how jumpy I'd become lately. The next morning, that fragile calm shattered. The brass wind chime Harold had hung years ago lay bent on the porch, its chain twisted and broken. The soil along the fence showed clear footprints, deep wide, belonging to a man with large sneakers. I stood there for a long time, the morning air biting at my cheeks, the fear sinking in like frost on the roses. Still, I refused to panic. I called Henry, but he didn't pick up. I thought of Amelia, then stopped myself. No, she'd just tell me to sell the house again. The following nights grew worse. Every evening, as the clock struck midnight, the sounds returned. A low, drawn-out hiss, like air escaping a pipe or something alive. It came from the garden, always from the same spot near the window. Once, I thought I heard faint laughter, carried by the wind, soft, mocking, almost playful. It sent a chill down my spine because it wasn't unfamiliar. That sound belonged to my past. When I was 8, I was kidnapped by a neighbor's unstable son and locked in an abandoned shed for 2 nights before being found. In the dark, he used to whistle and laugh just like that, taunting me from outside. I thought I had buried that fear decades ago, but now it returned alive and merciless. My hands trembled as I took my sleeping pills, hoping they'd grant me a few hours of peace. But the dreams that followed were worse than the waking terror. I kept seeing myself running down endless hallways, hearing the hiss behind me, the same laughter echoing through empty rooms. Each time I turned, the shadows swallowed my breath. I'd wake drenched in sweat, my heart thudding like a drum, unable to tell dream from reality. Sometimes I sat in bed until dawn, gripping the edge of the blanket, afraid to close my eyes again. People think aging means peace, that the world grows quieter with time. But no one tells you how loud loneliness can become, how fear, once it finds a crack, seeps into everything. That house, once my sanctuary, now felt like a maze where memories hunted me. And in those long hours before sunrise, I realized something chilling. Whoever was out there wasn't trying to break in. They were trying to break me. It began with small things, the kind most people would brush off. One night, the motion light in the backyard flicked on around 2 in the morning. I peeked through the curtain expecting to see a raccoon or a branch swaying in the wind, but the air was still and the garden empty. The light stayed on for nearly a minute before fading to black. I told myself it was just a glitch, but the next night it happened again. This time, the doorbell camera stopped working altogether. When I checked my phone, the app showed device offline. Someone had disconnected it from the Wi-Fi. My stomach sank. The following morning, sunlight spilled into the living room from a window I could have sworn I'd locked. I approached it slowly, heart thudding, and noticed something metallic lying on the coffee table, a lighter silver and unfamiliar. It was engraved with 2 small letters, HR. I stared at it for a long time, my hands trembling. Henry Rhodes Lawson, my son. My mind raced, reaching for explanations. Maybe he dropped it during a visit, but he hadn't been here in weeks. The thought that someone had entered my home while I slept clawed at my chest. I called Henry, but he didn't answer. I thought of calling the police, but what would I even say? That I found a lighter and a strange light. They would think I was confused. Everyone would. Later that day, while shopping for groceries, Mrs. Carter from down the street leaned toward me and said gently, "I heard Henry's worried about you. He said you've been a little forgetful lately." Her tone was kind, but her words landed like a blow. So that was it. My own son was telling people I was losing my mind. I smiled weakly, pretending not to care, but my throat felt tight as I walked away. That evening, I sat in the kitchen, staring at the lighter. Could I have imagined it all? Maybe I really did forget to lock the window. Maybe I never checked the camera. The line between reality and doubt began to blur, and I hated myself for even questioning it. The nights grew longer after that. I'd wake at every creak, every whisper of wind, unsure whether the danger was outside my door or inside my head. There is no loneliness quite like knowing that if you scream for help, no one will believe you. I began writing everything down the time the light turned on the exact date I found the lighter, every sound I heard. Proof, I told myself. Proof that I wasn't losing touch. But each note I wrote looked increasingly like the diary of a frightened woman spiraling into madness. Every night began the same way. I would wake with my heart pounding, drenched in sweat, the remnants of another nightmare fading into the dark. Sometimes I could still hear it, the scraping sound outside, something being dragged slowly across the yard. I would sit up in bed, straining my ears, afraid to move the curtain. The house was silent, except for that faint, deliberate noise. It always stopped the moment I turned on the light, leaving me staring into nothing but my own reflection in the window. One night, I gathered enough courage to call the police. My hands trembled as I explained that someone might be outside, that I'd heard noises several nights in a row. The dispatcher's voice was polite but distant. "We'll send a patrol car to check the area," he said. Hours passed, but no one came. I stayed awake until dawn, sitting in my armchair with the porch light on, clutching the phone like a lifeline. By sunrise, the fear had settled into something heavier, disbelief. I realized I was on my own. A few days later, Henry came by, his voice unusually soft. He looked around the living room as if taking inventory before sitting down across from me. "Mom," he began, "I've been thinking. You're not safe here anymore. Why don't you sell the house and move in with us? You'd have your own space, and Amelia could help with things." He smiled like he was offering salvation, but something in his eyes felt rehearsed. I tried to hide my unease. Maybe he truly believed he was helping, or maybe he wanted the same thing Amelia did. I couldn't tell anymore. After he left, the silence felt unbearable. I walked from room to room, touching the walls, the furniture, the small traces of my life still standing. Was I really imagining things? Was this fear only in my head like everyone seemed to think? Doubt began to gnaw at me sharper than fear ever did. That evening, I opened a blank notebook and began to write. I wrote everything: the time I woke up, the sound I heard, the words Henry had said. I documented every light flicker, every shadow that moved wrong. The pen felt steady in my hand, even when I didn't. Maybe no one would believe me now, but someday this record might. Each line became a promise to myself. I am not losing my mind. I am witnessing something real. As the days passed, the nightmares continued, but so did the writing. It was my way of holding on to truth, of anchoring myself to something solid when the world around me blurred. The house still whispered at night, But at least now I had proof that I was still here awake, aware, and not broken yet. It happened on a Thursday morning at the local charity meeting. The smell of coffee and cinnamon rolls filled the air, and for a moment, everything felt almost normal again. I was helping arrange donation forms when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Scarlett Lawson. "It's been ages." I turned and saw Mila Thompson, her hair shorter now, streaked with silver, her eyes still sharp and calm as ever. Years ago, she had been our family lawyer, the one who helped Harold draft his will. The moment she looked at me, I knew she saw through the mask I had been wearing. "You look tired," she said gently, not as a judgment, but as a fact. I tried to smile, but my hands trembled around the papers I was holding. Mila didn't press further. She just placed a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Come by my office after this, please. Just to talk." At her office, sunlight poured through the window, lighting the soft edges of her wooden desk. She offered me tea and let me sit in silence until I was ready. Then she said the words that broke something open in me: "I believe you." Fear leaves traces on the face, in the voice, in the way a person hesitates before speaking. I see it. Her voice was steady, reassuring, like a door finally unlocking. So I told her everything. The sounds at night, the lighter, the police who never came, the way Henry and Amelia kept suggesting I sell the house. Mila listened without interruption, occasionally jotting down notes, her brow furrowed in quiet concern. When I mentioned the will Harold had written, her eyes softened. "Harold was always thorough," she said. I nodded and reached into my purse, pulling out the letter he had left me years ago, sealed in its original envelope. His handwriting was shaky but clear. "If anyone ever tries to take this house through deceit, hold on to reason, not fear." By the time I finished, tears were running down my cheeks, but for the first time in months, I felt lighter. Mila folded the letter carefully and said, "Then we'll hold on to reason together." She closed her notebook, looked me straight in the eye, and added, "I'm staying with you for a few nights, just until you feel safe again." I wanted to protest, but her tone left no room for argument. She smiled, faintly. "Let's call it helping a friend sleep better." But I caught the flicker in her gaze, the cautious alertness of a woman already planning her next move. That night, as Mila settled into the guest room, I felt a strange calm. The house no longer seemed like a prison, but a place waiting for truth to surface. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't alone in the dark. The first night passed quietly, almost too quietly. Mila slept in the guest room, the air still and heavy with expectation. I stayed awake most of the night, listening for the sounds that had haunted me for weeks, but there was nothing. No rustling, no hiss, no shadows moving outside. In the morning, Mila smiled gently and said maybe the silence was a good sign. I wanted to believe her. The second night, the sound returned. Faint at first, like a whisper dragged through the dark. It came from the porch, a soft hiss, almost rhythmic. Mila sat up immediately, notebook in hand, jotting down the time and direction of the sound. I could see her eyes sharp with focus, not fear. She didn't speak, just listened, every muscle alert. When dawn came, she told me she'd heard it too, but we should wait, observe, not react. Her calmness steadied me, though unease still curled in my chest. Then came the third night. The house was wrapped in darkness, the only light, a thin silver beam from the moon, slipping through the curtains. Around 2 in the morning, Mila stirred. She thought she heard something, whispers barely audible, carried by the wind. Then a flicker. A reflection of light moved across the window pane, as if from a phone screen. Mila froze, her instincts razor sharp. She switched off the lamp, crept toward the curtain, and pulled it back just enough to see. Outside in the dim yard, a figure stood near the rose bushes. A man's silhouette, tall shoulders slouched slightly, phone in hand. The faint glow of the screen lit his face for a split second, enough for her to catch the outline. Then, as if sensing her gaze, the figure slipped into the shadows and vanished. Neither of us slept after that. When morning came, Mila went outside first. The dew still clung to the grass and near the fence. She stopped, crouched, and examined the ground. There were footprints, large, clear, the same tread pattern she had seen once before on Henry's sneakers. Next to them, half buried under the damp soil, was a small black box. She opened it carefully and found a tiny Bluetooth speaker and a sound chip. It was programmed to play the exact hissing noise that had tormented me for weeks. When she walked back into the kitchen, her face was composed, her voice even. "Scarlett," she said softly, "I think it's time we installed an infrared camera system. Let's not confront anyone yet. The truth has a way of revealing itself when watched closely." Her calmness didn't just comfort me. It rekindled something I thought I had lost the courage to stop running from the dark and start shining light into it. After Mila's discovery that night, I agreed to her plan. The following morning, we hired a professional technician to install a full 360-degree security system, infrared cameras with motion sensors, night vision, and automatic cloud backup. Mila made sure the system was directly connected to both our phones. "Cameras don't lie," she said, her tone calm but firm. For the first time in months, I felt a strange mix of fear and relief. Whatever happened next, at least there would be proof. A week passed quietly. Too quietly. The garden seemed still almost watchful. I told myself maybe they had given up whoever they were. Then, at exactly 2:14 a.m. on a Thursday, my phone buzzed with a sharp alert. Unusual motion detected. Backyard camera. My chest tightened. I tapped the notification, and the live feed opened. What I saw made my hands turn cold. Under the dim security light, two figures crept across the yard. One tall, one smaller. Henry and Amelia. My son and his wife moving on all fours like burglars, whispering and laughing. Henry carried something small and black in his hand, one of those Bluetooth speakers. Amelia followed, holding small plastic bags that shimmered faintly under the light. Mila, awakened by the same alert, joined me by the screen, her jaw tightening as she recognized them. The footage was painfully clear. Henry crouched behind the rose bushes, placing the speaker under the window. A low hissing sound began to play, the same eerie noise that had haunted me for weeks. Amelia tore open one of the plastic bags, tossing handfuls of what looked like dry ice across the ground. Mist swirled upward, curling like smoke from the underworld. They were staging a haunting. My own son was turning my home into a stage for madness. Then came the moment that sealed everything. Amelia slipped on the damp grass landing with a thud and laughed, a shrill, delighted laugh. Her voice carried perfectly through the microphone. "Tomorrow she'll faint for sure," she said between giggles. The timestamp in the corner read 02:14:37 a.m. Every second recorded, every sound preserved, legally admissible under Federal Rules of Evidence 901. I couldn't move. Mila placed a hand on my shoulder, steady and firm. "Now we have the truth," she said softly. "And the truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs to be seen." I stared at the frozen image on the screen, my son's face half lit by the glow of deceit. The fear that had ruled my nights slowly turned into something else. Not rage, but clarity. That morning, I saved the footage in 3 places: the cloud, an encrypted drive, and a USB Mila kept in her briefcase. The next step wasn't revenge. It was justice, calm, deliberate, and undeniable. I didn't cry. I didn't even raise my voice. I just sat there staring at the video that had shattered whatever illusion of family I had left. I played it 3 times, once to be sure, twice to feel it, and a third time to stop feeling anything at all. When the screen finally went dark, I closed the laptop gently, as if I were putting something dead to rest. Then I walked to the kitchen, boiled water, and poured myself a cup of tea. The steam rose quietly. My hands were steady, though my heart wasn't. I remember looking at my reflection in the window. My face looked strangely calm, too calm. No anger, no grief, just emptiness like a pond after a storm. I had always believed that silence was a weakness, but that night, I realized it could also be power. I took out my notebook and turned to a blank page. In careful handwriting, I wrote, "If kindness is exploited, then clarity shall be the fairest revenge." I underlined the last 3 words, then closed the book. When Mila arrived that morning, I was still sitting by the window. She looked worried the moment she saw me. "You watched it?" she asked softly. I nodded. "All of it," I said. She hesitated before asking, "Do you want me to report it to the police?" I could hear the urgency in her voice, but I wasn't ready. "Not yet. Not now," I told her, my voice calm and even. "I want them to face themselves first. Let them see what they've become before the law does." Mila studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. She didn't argue. She knew. After she left, I sat alone again, watching the light shift across the room. The fear that had once wrapped around me like a noose was gone. In its place was something colder, sharper control. I thought about all those nights I had doubted my own mind, how easily they made me feel small, confused, powerless. No more. That night, I reread my journal from the beginning, every trembling word, every desperate note I'd written when I thought I was losing myself. I smiled faintly. Those pages weren't a record of weakness. They were proof of survival. I wasn't the frightened old woman they wanted me to be anymore. I was awake. I was patient. And this time the game was mine. That night I decided I was done being afraid. Fear had lived rent-free in my house for too long, whispering in every creak of the floorboards, hiding in every shadow. But now I had clarity, and clarity, I realized, was the sharpest weapon a woman could hold. In the storage room behind Harold's old tool cabinet, I remembered something I hadn't touched in years, a few rolls of American ultra-sticky mousetrap tape. Harold used to keep them for the attic, but I had a better use in mind. I took the rolls out, peeled the backing, and laid the sticky strips quietly along the porch steps and around the area where the camera had once caught Henry standing. My hands didn't shake this time. I moved with purpose, almost serene. The night was cool, the moon high, and the roses rustled faintly as if cheering me on. For the first time, I didn't feel like prey. I felt like someone setting the rules of the game. At exactly 2 o'clock, the same hour as always, the motion alert blinked on my phone. I turned down the lights and watched from the window. There she was, Amelia, creeping across the yard in a dark coat, phone in hand, her face lit faintly by its blue glow. She crouched near the window, whispering to herself, maybe checking whether her ghost show had frightened me enough. I didn't move. I just watched. Then came the sound I'd been waiting for, a sharp gasp, a stumble, and a tearing noise. Amelia's foot landed squarely on one of the traps, and the glue held fast. She tried to lift her leg, but the more she pulled, the deeper she sank. In the camera's night vision, I saw her panic arms flailing, mouth open in a silent scream. A moment later, a real scream cut through the air. She lost her balance and crashed onto the porch, her dress ripping as she fell. The fabric stuck to the glue, trapping her there, like a fly in amber. Moments later, another shadow appeared. Henry rushing toward her, whispering frantically, "Keep quiet. Someone might hear." He bent down, struggling to free her. I watched as the two of them clawed at the tape, their hands sticking with every pull until they finally tore free and stumbled away into the dark. They left behind everything: the Bluetooth speaker, the half-torn dress, and long strips of sticky tape glistening under the porch light. When the yard fell silent again, I stepped outside. The night smelled clean, like rain and justice. I picked up the remnants, carefully sealed them in a plastic bag, and placed them on the table for Mila. Proof. Simple, undeniable physical truth. For the first time in months, I slept soundly. The darkness outside no longer frightened me because it wasn't hiding anything anymore. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. The house was quiet, but not the fearful kind of quiet it was, the calm after a storm. Mila arrived just after 7, still in her work suit, hair neatly tied back, eyes sharp as ever. We sat at the kitchen table, the laptop between us, replaying the footage from the night before. Every sound, every scream, every frame was there. The truth, clear and undeniable. Mila plugged in a USB drive and began saving the entire file, her fingers moving with the precision of someone who knew the weight of what we had. "This," she said, pointing to the screen, as Amelia's voice echoed through the speakers, "is textbook elder harassment. They didn't just scare you, they planned, executed, and repeated it. That's criminal under Oregon's elder protection statutes." Her tone was steady, professional, but her jaw was tight. I could see anger flickering behind her calm exterior. She pulled out a folder from her briefcase filled with neatly typed forms. "We'll file a report," she said. "Video evidence, timestamps, physical proof, the adhesive tape, the torn fabric. It's all admissible. Once you sign this statement, the police will have to act." She laid the papers gently in front of me along with a pen. I stared at the signature line for a long moment. My name looked strange, almost fragile, printed in neat black letters. I thought about what it would mean: police cars, handcuffs, courtrooms, reporters. Justice, yes, but the kind that ends loudly. The kind that burns everything in its path. Then I looked up at Mila and shook my head. "No," I said quietly. "Not yet." Her eyebrows rose slightly. "Scarlett, we have them. We can make this stop today." I took a deep breath, my voice calm but certain. "Stopping them isn't enough. I want them to feel what I felt, to know what it's like to walk through town and hear whispers, to see faces turn away. I don't want them to fear the police, Mila. I want them to fear shame." She studied me for a long moment, then slowly closed the folder. "Then we'll do it your way," she said. "But you'll let me protect you while you do." I nodded. Outside, sunlight spilled through the window, washing the table in gold. The fear that once ruled my life had turned into something sharper: resolve. The law could punish them, yes. But I wanted the truth, to live in the open where everyone could see it. Because sometimes the worst punishment isn't prison. It's the loss of the mask. In the days that followed, I played my part carefully. I answered Henry's texts the way I always did: short, polite, a little scattered, just enough for him to believe I was still the same frail, trusting mother he thought he could manipulate. He sent the usual messages, reminders about my safety questions, about whether I had slept well, and once a thinly veiled suggestion that maybe I should let him handle my financial paperwork again. I replied with warmth and a few exclamation marks, the kind that made me sound naive. The truth, however, was that every word I sent him was part of my own quiet performance. While he believed he was keeping control, I was already building my fortress. Each morning, I reviewed the video files, renaming and encrypting them. Then I uploaded copies to multiple cloud drives, one under my own name, one under Mila's, and one to an old friend from the church women's group named Margaret, who understood discretion better than anyone. "In case something happens," I wrote in the email, "please keep this safe." I added no explanation. Margaret would know what that meant. She had seen enough families like mine to understand. The house felt different during those days, quieter, but no longer lonely. My fear had cooled into focus. The same kitchen table where I once sat, trembling, now became my planning desk. Mila visited each evening, going over notes, preparing backup documents, and helping me draft a written timeline of events. Just facts. She reminded me, no emotion. The law loves logic. I smiled at that. Logic, I realized, was just another form of power, the kind they never expected an old woman to have. On the third day, Henry texted that he was stopping by. Mila suggested she stay in the background observing quietly. When Henry arrived, I greeted him at the door with my usual gentle smile. "Come in, dear," I said softly. "I've made tea." He walked in casual and confident, scanning the room like he owned it. "You look tired, Mom," he said. "You've got to stop staying up so late. It's not good for you." I poured his tea slowly, the steam curling between us like a secret. "I'll sleep better soon," I told him, and meant it. He talked. I listened, the same rehearsed conversation about how the neighborhood was unsafe, how I'd be better off living closer to him. I nodded along, even thanked him for his concern. But as he spoke, I watched him through the steam, every word recorded in my memory with the same precision as those camera frames. By the time he left, he was smiling, thinking he still had me wrapped around his finger. I closed the door quietly behind him, locked it, and stood still for a moment. The house was silent again, but this time the silence belonged to me. The fire hadn't gone out. It was just burning lower, deeper, waiting for its moment to rise. I watched her change her tactics with a quiet kind of attention that felt like waiting for winter to end, knowing a thaw would come and reveal everything buried under the snow. After the staged hauntings failed, Amelia began showing up more often, always with that air of helpfulness that smelled faintly of store perfume and a careful smile. She would offer to straighten a shelf, fluff a cushion, or dust an old book with her delicate wrist movements. She spoke about light and space, as if modernity were a kindness to be gifted, and I played the part she wanted me to play. I welcomed her in. I set a kettle on the stove, and I watched where she placed her hands and where her eyes lingered. In the beginning, I thought perhaps she simply liked the aesthetic of things, but then small items began to shift position, and one by one, I noticed a gap where something once had been. She never left the cupboard open for long, and her hands moved faster than necessary when she sorted a box of trinkets. Once, she praised an enamel brooch and then asked if she could clean the attic trunk because dust might harm a delicate piece, which I allowed without thinking twice. The next morning, the brooch was gone. Another day, she admired a vase and then fussed over the arrangement of dried flowers, promising to put them somewhere prettier. The vase disappeared before dusk. At first, I felt a cold flicker of disbelief. Then I turned that flicker into a quiet ledger. I did not accuse, I did not shout, and I did not call Henry. Instead, I opened my notebook and wrote the date, the time, the precise location where each item had rested before and after her visit. Recording became my small, steady rebellion. I wrote descriptions that would matter in some future light. I noted the maker marks on silverware, the tiny chip on a porcelain rim, the faint initials on a locket chain. I took photographs with my phone and stored them in a folder labeled with the day and the hour. I placed a discreet sticker beneath the leg of a side table so I could tell if it had been moved. I started to leave small visible marks that only someone watching closely would see, and then I watched as those marks were erased by hands that thought my eyes were elsewhere. Every time a thing vanished, I added another line to the ledger, and each line made the picture clearer, the web around them more visible. When Amelia became bolder, suggesting she reorganize whole drawers and rearrange the china cabinet, I let her. I watched her fingers slip items into a cloth bag balanced on her hip, and I pretended I had no idea. I kept my voice soft and my smiles patient because I understood the currency of underestimation. The more she believed I was fragile and easily fooled, the less careful she became. That was the plan. I called Mila and described the pattern in a measured tone, listing dates and missing pieces as if reciting a shopping list. I told her that if they thought I was weak, I would let them reveal themselves, and I asked Mila to prepare a witness from the church group to corroborate the timeline should we ever need public testimony. I felt no triumph in catching them. My satisfaction was quieter, like the small click of a key turning in a lock. I was no longer only preserving objects. I was preserving the truth about them and about myself. The house was full of history and memory, and the thefts were assaults upon both. I resolved to document everything until the pattern could not be denied. I had learned that patience could be a form of strategy, and that the gentle acts of a woman who appears harmless could be rearranged into a force that unmasks the people who thought they were clever. I decided it was time to stop depending on chance. One evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and opened my laptop. The world sells everything these days, even truth if you know what to search for. I typed mini hidden cameras with cloud backup and found exactly what I needed. Tiny wireless devices, no larger than a button, easy to conceal, and nearly impossible to detect. Within 3 days, the package arrived. I opened it carefully, feeling both nervous and strangely empowered. That night, I began my quiet work. I placed one camera in the ceramic pot by the window, another behind a framed photograph of Harold, and a third between the books on the shelf, angled perfectly toward the cabinet, where Amelia always offered to help tidy. Each camera was synced to an encrypted cloud account Mila had helped me set up. I tested the angles, adjusted the lighting, then shut everything off and waited. From the outside, my home looked as ordinary as ever. Inside, it had eyes. The next few days unfolded like theater. Amelia came often, chirping her cheerful greetings, armed with a feather duster and that same sugary tone. "Mom, I'll help you wipe down this corner, so much dust here." I smiled, thanked her, and pretended not to notice the faint glint of interest in her gaze. Each time she visited the cameras, blinked silently, recording, uploading, preserving. I didn't watch the footage right away. Instead, I made notes in my journal, dates, times, her choice of rooms, just as I'd done before. Patience, I reminded myself, is what separates instinct from proof. After a week, I finally opened the folder labeled Home Backup. There she was, clear as daylight. The footage began with Amelia humming softly as she dusted her reflection, flickering in the glass cabinet. Then in one smooth motion, she opened the drawer, slipped a gold bracelet into her handbag, and paused to look at herself in the mirror. The expression she wore wasn't guilt. It was satisfaction. She tilted her chin, smiled, even brushed a strand of hair from her face, like a woman admiring her own cleverness. Watching her, I felt no rage, only a still, chilling clarity. I saved the file, uploaded 2 copies to separate drives, and sent one to Mila through a secure link. She called me later that night. "Scarlett," she said, her voice steady but warm. "You've done everything right. What we have now is worth more than gold. It's the truth." I closed my notebook, wrote down her words, and underlined them twice. For years, I had feared being disbelieved, dismissed as an old woman losing her grip. But that night, I realized something precious truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be seen. The first time I heard the rumor, it came to me through someone who didn't mean harm. Mrs. Jenkins, my neighbor across the street, stopped me at the mailbox one morning. She smiled kindly, but hesitated before speaking. "Scarlett, dear, I heard you've been having a hard time keeping track of things lately. taxes and such. If you need any help, you know we're all here for you." Her voice was warm, but her eyes carried that unmistakable softness, the kind people use when they're talking to someone fragile. I thanked her politely, though I already knew where the story had started. Amelia. When she couldn't manipulate me anymore, she turned to something far more dangerous: words. They cost nothing, but they cut deep and travel fast. She began visiting neighbors with baskets of muffins and a face full of concern. "Mom's been forgetting things lately," she would say, lowering her voice just enough to sound sincere. "I'm so worried about her. She doesn't even remember to pay her property tax. Henry and I are trying to help, but she gets upset whenever we bring it up." By the end of the week, everyone in the neighborhood had heard some version of it. At church that Sunday, I felt the shift. The familiar greetings came, but slower. The smiles were polite, cautious, pitying. During tea hour, I overheard whispers my name, followed by words like memory money and refusal. It's strange how lies can shape the air around you. I could almost feel them settle on my shoulders, light but suffocating. My instinct was to defend myself, to shout the truth into every corner of that room, but I didn't. Instead, I smiled, poured myself some coffee, and asked Mrs. Carter how her granddaughter's college application was going. Sometimes silence speaks louder than argument. When I got home, I sat at my desk and opened my notebook. I wrote down everything: dates, who said what, who seemed to know too much. Not out of anger, but discipline. Mila had told me once that truth doesn't need speed, it only needs endurance. I reminded myself of that as I wrote a single sentence at the bottom of the page. "Whoever lies once must lie again to cover the first." That night, I watched the street from my window. The porch light flickered over the mailbox, and for a brief moment, I saw Amelia's car parked at the corner before it drove away. Let her talk, I thought. Let her fill the air with poison. Every word she speaks is another thread in her own noose. And when the truth comes out, as it always does, I won't need to defend myself. The truth will do it for me. After the rumors spread, I decided not to hide anymore. If they wanted to see a fragile old woman losing her mind, I would give them something else to look at: a woman too alive, too steady to fit inside their gossip. So I started going out again, not to defend myself, but to live loudly in my own quiet way. On Mondays, I joined the church kitchen to help cook for the shelter. My hands, once trembling with anxiety, now chopped vegetables with a calm rhythm. The younger volunteers called me Miss Scarlet, and one of them said she wanted to grow old like me, with silver hair and sharp eyes. I laughed and told her, "Just keep your receipts and your sense of humor." On Wednesdays, I donated books to the community center and stayed to read stories to the children. On Fridays, I baked extra bread and left it at the doorstep of the elderly couple next door. Every small act was deliberate, not for show, but because goodness, when consistent, speaks louder than any defense. People began to notice. The same neighbors who once whispered started stopping by to talk. They asked for recipes, shared news about their grandchildren, even apologized in small, wordless ways through softer greetings and longer smiles. The shift was slow, like sunlight melting frost. A week later, the local paper printed a short column with a photo of me holding a basket of loaves. The headline read, "Scarlett Lawson, the Golden Heart of Silver Pines." I stared at the picture for a long time. Mila had called earlier that morning, laughing softly when she saw it online. "You see," she said, "sometimes the best revenge is to let the world see how loved you are." I didn't answer right away. I was looking at my own face in that photograph, not the tired woman I once saw in the mirror, but someone calm, composed, and unbroken. There was power in that image, not because it silenced the lies, but because it made them irrelevant. That evening, when I walked to the store, people greeted me by name. Someone called out, We read about you in the paper, Scarlett. I smiled and waved, feeling the warmth of ordinary kindness wrap around me. It wasn't fame or even vindication, it was restoration. The truth didn't need to expose anyone. It simply needed to shine where lies had cast their shadow. I thought of Mila's words again, and this time I smiled too. Sometimes revenge doesn't look like a battle. Sometimes it looks like peace. It was a golden evening, the kind that made even the old oak outside my window look soft and forgiving. I had spent the entire morning preparing the table setting out the good china Harold and I had received on our wedding day, polishing the silver arranging lilies from the garden into a vase. Everything gleamed with quiet dignity. My invitation to Henry and Amelia had been simple dinner tonight. There are family matters we should discuss. Nothing in the tone hinted at what I truly meant. When they arrived, Amelia's voice filled the hallway, first bright and practiced. "Mom, the house looks wonderful. You didn't have to go to all this trouble." Henry followed behind her, smiling cautious, the way people do when they sense an undercurrent but can't locate its source. I greeted them both warmly, kissed my son on the cheek, and told them to sit. The smell of roast chicken and rosemary filled the room. Everything looked peaceful. Everything was a stage. Dinner began pleasantly enough. We spoke about the weather, about a neighbor's new puppy, about the renovation plans Amelia had for their future house. I nodded, listening, my face calm, my tone kind. The clinking of cutlery was steady, rhythmic. Every move was deliberate. Then I began telling a story one Henry had heard since childhood about the time Harold and I first bought this house. How we had painted every wall ourselves. How Harold joked that no one could ever steal what was built with love and sweat. Henry smiled faintly. Amelia sipped her wine, pretending to care. That's when I looked at both of them and said almost casually, "Your father used to say this house would always belong to those who are honest of heart." My voice was gentle, almost nostalgic, but the air shifted. Henry's fork froze mid-air. Amelia's laughter came too quickly, too loud, an artificial sound meant to shatter tension. "Oh, Mom," she said, still laughing, "you always make things sound so dramatic. We're family, after all." She reached for another glass of wine, her hand just slightly trembling. Henry stared at his plate, eyes flickering, as though the words had scraped against something buried deep inside him. I smiled softly and passed him the bread. "Of course we're family," I said. "That's why I wanted us all here to remember where we began." The moment stretched fragile but charged like the silence before lightning strikes. Under the table, my phone recorded everything. Their words, their faces, their hesitation. It wasn't confrontation I wanted that night. It was documentation. The final layer of truth sealed in warmth and candlelight. As they ate, I looked at them the way a teacher watches a lesson unfold. Patient, observant, certain. They thought they were here for dinner. They didn't realize they had already stepped into the last chapter of their own story. The call came on a gray December morning. I was trimming the last of the lavender in the garden when my phone rang. Amelia's voice spilled through the speaker, sweet and bright, like a ribbon wrapped around poison. "Mom, we were thinking, this year, why don't we host the Christmas party at your place? It's so cozy. Everyone loves that old-fashioned charm. Don't worry, I'll handle everything." Her tone carried that kind of cheer people use when they think they're doing you a favor or taking something without asking. I paused, brushed the dirt from my gloves, and smiled to myself. "If you truly want to do it," I said softly, "I won't stop you." My voice was gentle, but inside I felt the stillness of a hunter who has finally stopped running. I ended the call knowing she heard exactly what she wanted permission and nothing of what I truly meant. Later that afternoon, I imagined her reaction. She would turn to Henry triumphant, her lipstick-stained smile stretching wide. And she did. Mila later told me that Amelia had posted on social media within the hour Christmas at our family estate this year, feeling blessed. Mila had seen it and sent me a screenshot with a simple message. It begins. Henry, of course, was proud. At the office, he joked to his colleagues, "We're hosting Christmas at my mother's place, but honestly, it's basically mine now, just a matter of time." I pictured his smirk, the kind he used to wear as a teenager when he thought he'd outsmarted me. Some habits die slowly. Within days, the planning began. Amelia sent out invitations to her circle friends from her PR firm, the church ladies she pretended to like, even a few of Henry's co-workers. Formal dinner at the Lawson family home, the card said, printed in silver script. She ordered new curtains, arranged for a catering team, and spent hours at my house moving things around as if she already owned the space. Every shift of furniture, every new decoration was a small declaration of conquest. I let her. I offered tea, nodded at her choices, even complimented her taste. Inside, though, every motion she made was another step deeper into the trap I had already set. Mila had helped me line everything perfectly. The cameras, the backup files, the legal documents ready to be unveiled at the right moment. All we needed was for Amelia and Henry to believe the performance was theirs, not mine. The irony almost made me laugh. They thought they were hosting a Christmas party. In truth, they were walking into a confession wrapped in garland and candlelight. A week before the party, the house no longer felt like mine. It began with Amelia's arrival one morning, armed with rolls of wrapping paper boxes of decorations, and a swarm of her friends trailing behind her. They poured in like a cheerful storm, chattering, laughing, and moving as if the space belonged to them. "Let's make this place sparkle," Amelia said brightly, clapping her hands. Within minutes, the living room was unrecognizable. They pushed the furniture aside, rolled out a new red and gold carpet, and taped silver decals along the walls. One of her friends climbed a ladder to hang fairy lights around the fireplace, while another replaced my curtains with shimmering fabric for better light. At the center of it all, Amelia planted a wooden sign painted in cursive white letters. "Welcome to Rhodes Lawson. Christmas night." My own surname had been swallowed whole by hers, and for a moment, the weight of it pressed against my chest like dust I couldn't breathe through. I stood quietly by the kitchen doorway, watching the invasion unfold. My photographs, the ones Harold had taken of our first Christmas here, were stacked carelessly on the floor to make room for garlands and faux snow. My lace tablecloth had been replaced by a sequined runner. Every sound in the room, the laughter, the clinking glasses, the artificial cheer scraped against something deep inside me. Yet I said nothing. It happened in an instant. Amelia reached up to adjust a wreath, and her elbow brushed against the shelf. The porcelain vase, my grandmother's, the last one of her collection, wobbled, tipped, and fell. The crash was sharp, clean, final. For a moment, the room froze. Then Amelia laughed softly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Mom. It must have been just a decorative piece anyway." "Just decorative." Henry walked in at that moment carrying a crate of wine bottles. He looked at the broken shards on the floor, then at me. His face gave away nothing. No guilt, no sympathy, not even acknowledgement. He only said, "Let's not make a scene," before motioning to Amelia and the others to continue. I felt the world narrow to the sound of sweeping someone collecting the fragments of my family's past into a trash bag. I didn't move to stop them. I simply stood still, my hands clasped in front of me. The air smelled of cinnamon candles, and something else. Betrayal, maybe. When the room filled again with laughter, I looked around at what was once my home, now dressed like a stage set for someone else's story. My voice came out barely above a whisper, but I knew the walls heard me. "This Christmas," I said softly, "will be different." Christmas Eve arrived wrapped in glitter and pretense. The house glowed under strings of lights Amelia had insisted on hanging, each bulb flickering like a small act of intrusion. The scent of cinnamon and wine filled the air. Guests poured in, Amelia's colleagues in shimmering dresses, Henry's co-workers in tailored suits, and of course, Mrs. Rhodes, Amelia's mother, wrapped in fur and pride. She moved through the room like a peacock, boasting to anyone who would listen about her perfect daughter who managed to turn her mother-in-law's old house into something presentable. I sat on the corner sofa near the fireplace, a quiet spectator in my own living room. Every inch of the house gleamed, but it no longer breathed like home. The laughter was too loud, the compliments rehearsed. Amelia floated through the crowd like a hostess in a commercial, her heels clicking, her voice bright, her smile too polished to be real. And here she said, guiding a group toward the dining room, is where we'll have dinner. I picked the decor myself. Mom-in-law didn't want to bother with it. The guests nodded approvingly, unaware that every plate, every silver spoon, had once been part of my life, my history. Henry stayed close to the drinks table, laughing with his co-workers, avoiding my eyes. I watched him from afar, recognizing the same nervous confidence he'd had as a boy, right before lying. Amelia moved like a performer who thought the audience adored her, never realizing the play was already being recorded. Every word, every gesture by the cameras she thought were decorations. The evening stretched into its performance peak, the gift exchange. Amelia clapped her hands, her voice sing-song sweet. "Now everyone, it's time for presents." "And this," she said dramatically, lifting a small box wrapped in gold, "is a very special gift for my wonderful mother-in-law." Her friends cheered. Henry smiled proud. Mrs. Rhodes leaned forward, glowing with satisfaction. I accepted the box politely. The paper crinkled softly as I unwrapped it. Inside lay a bright red dress, the kind sold in discount stores, made of cheap polyester that shone too much under light. The stitching was uneven, the fabric thin. It was almost identical to the elegant designer dress Mrs. Rhodes was wearing that evening, except this one looked like a counterfeit. Amelia's grin widened. I saw this and thought, "It's so you, Mom. You'll look festive in red, don't you think?" A murmur rippled through the room, half amusement, half discomfort. I ran my fingers lightly across the fabric, feeling its roughness, its falseness, and smiled faintly. "How thoughtful of you," I said, my tone calm, unshaken. The cameras caught everything, the flash of arrogance in her eyes, the small smirk Henry tried to hide, the brief silence before the laughter resumed. I folded the dress neatly back into the box and placed it on the coffee table. "Yes," I said softly, looking at the firelight dance across their faces, "this Christmas will be one to remember." Mrs. Rhodes was the first to laugh. Her voice rang out across the glittering room, sharp and syrupy all at once. "Oh, it does look just like mine," she said, brushing her fur collar, "only missing a few $1,000s, I suppose." The laughter came fast and loud, the kind that fills a room but empties the air of kindness. Henry chuckled along, trying to look at ease. Amelia's smile widened, but her eyes slid toward me, glinting with that smug, silent dare. I didn't flinch. I adjusted the collar of my cardigan, rose slowly from the sofa, and felt the room still around me. The firelight flickered against the walls, the laughter fading into a thin, uncertain hush. "Red really does suit the season," I said calmly, my voice carrying through the silence. "But I think there's something else that fits this evening even better." I walked toward the table where the gifts were piled, every movement deliberate, unhurried. The floor creaked under my steps, the same familiar creak Harold used to joke about fixing, but never did. I picked up a small, silver-wrapped box, tied with a pale ribbon, elegant, understated. "Amelia, dear," I said, turning to her, "I have something for you, too." A ripple of surprise crossed the room. Amelia blinked, then laughed a little too brightly. "Oh, you shouldn't have, Mom." How sweet. She took the box, flashing that confident smile that had fooled so many. Her friends leaned in curious. Even Mrs. Rhodes arched a brow, ready for more amusement. As Amelia untied the ribbon, I stood perfectly still watching. The paper fell away slowly, like the peeling of pretense itself. "Oh," she said, lifting the lid. For a brief moment, her grin faltered. Inside lay a small flash drive, sleek, simple, resting on a note in my handwriting. "For your memories. May the truth always shine brighter than tinsel." No one else could see what was inside, but the color drained from Amelia's face, as if the room had gone cold. Mila had helped me choose that phrase. Every video file, every timestamp, every whisper of deceit, all neatly stored, ready to be played at the right time and in the right hands. The silence stretched. Mrs. Rhodes looked puzzled. Henry frowned, and Amelia forced a laugh that broke halfway. "Oh, Mom, you and your little surprises," she said weakly. I met her gaze steady and calm, then smiled, not cruelly, but like someone who had finally stopped carrying weight that was never hers to bear. I lifted my glass slightly and said, "To family and to truth, which always finds its way home." The guests clinked glasses, unsure but obedient laughter resuming a bit too nervously. Amelia sat frozen, fingers tightening around the box, as though it might burn. That night I didn't need revenge. I only needed the truth to sit quietly in the room, and it did, glowing brighter than any Christmas light. When Amelia opened the envelope, the smile on her face froze halfway. At first, she thought it was another of my sentimental gifts, perhaps an old photo or a family letter. But when the papers slid out, and the red legal stamp of Mila Thompson, attorney at law, gleamed under the chandelier, her breath caught. On top was a printed document. No trespassing notice, signed and sealed. Beneath it lay a small USB drive clipped neatly beside printed images. The photos showed her face. Henry's face and scenes too familiar to deny the night they crept through my garden. The broken vase, the stolen trinkets, the smirk she thought no one had seen. Her fingers trembled. What is this supposed to be?" she asked, her voice brittle, trying to sound amused. I didn't answer. Instead, I walked toward the flat-screen TV that she had insisted on redecorating, around the one she claimed made the room feel more modern. Mila had formatted the footage herself, time-stamped, authenticated, impossible to dispute. I inserted the USB into the port. The screen flickered, then came alive. At first, only the faint hiss of wind and a shaky image of the backyard appeared. Then, under the glow of night vision, two figures crawled through the garden, Henry and Amelia. Their voices, distorted but unmistakable, filled the room. "Shh, keep your light low," Henry whispered. "Don't worry," Amelia giggled. "Tomorrow she'll probably have a heart attack." Her laughter, that same laugh that had charmed neighbors and coworkers, now echoed through the living room, like the sound of glass breaking. Around us, no one moved. Mrs. Rhodes sat frozen, her wineglass trembling slightly in her hand. Henry's colleagues stared stunned. Someone in the back whispered, "Is that real?" No one answered. The Christmas music still played softly in the background, silent night, ironic and cruel in its calm. The lights from the tree cast faint shadows across their faces. I turned from the screen and looked at them, my son and his wife, still standing pale and wordless. "You were right, Amelia," I said quietly, straightening my cardigan. "Red does fit the season." I let the words hang in the air before adding, "And you, my dear, are far better at acting than I ever gave you credit for." But the thing about cameras, I paused, my tone calm and precise. They don't know how to lie. Amelia's eyes filled with tears she couldn't summon at will this time. Henry reached out as if to speak, but no sound came. Around them, the crowd shifted uneasily, pulling back as though the truth itself might burn. The room fell utterly still. The fire crackled faintly. The tree lights twinkled, and outside, the snow kept falling soft, indifferent cleansing. Mrs. Rhodes was the first to turn pale. The color drained from her carefully powdered face as she stared at her daughter, lips parting, but no words coming out. The proud, talkative woman who had spent the entire evening boasting about her perfect child now looked like she was witnessing a stranger. Amelia stood frozen beside the tree, her smile collapsing inch by inch, like glass cracking under its own reflection. Then a voice broke the silence, deep male, unsteady. One of Henry's co-workers muttered, "My God, this is elder abuse." The words sliced through the room like a blade. Every head turned toward me then, back to the screen. The music playing a cheerful carol just moments ago suddenly felt grotesque against the unfolding truth. The lights on the Christmas tree blinked rhythmically, as if counting down the seconds of humiliation. Henry moved first. "Turn it off!" he barked, his voice sharp, desperate. He rushed toward the television, yanking at the power cord. But nothing happened. I had already unplugged the main control from the back earlier that evening. Mila's idea, of course. The screen stayed bright, vivid, merciless. The footage continued rolling. Amelia appeared again, this time inside my study. The image was clear enough to show her reflection in the glass cabinet as she slipped one of my antique necklaces into her purse. There was no sound, only the faint hum of the recording, but her expression said enough. Calculating. Satisfied. A ripple of whispers moved through the crowd. Someone gasped softly. Two women near the piano exchanged glances and shook their heads. Mrs. Rhodes lifted her hand to her mouth, eyes wide in disbelief. "Amelia," she whispered, trembling. "What have you done?" Amelia's breath came out uneven, her voice breaking. This is taken out of context. It's not." But no one seemed to hear her. The video shifted again. Henry's face now visible, his voice caught clearly as he said, "Don't worry, no one will believe her anyway." His laughter filled the room, cruel and juvenile. The air turned heavy. Every whisper stopped. You could hear the faint clink of a wine glass being set down, the creak of someone's chair as they slowly stood up. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft hum of the TV and the quiet gasp of a lie collapsing. I didn't move. I stood near the fireplace, calm, watching, as the truth did what justice often cannot. It spoke for itself. The camera's lens had no emotion, no bias. It only showed what was real. Then finally, I said almost kindly, "No need to explain, dear. The video speaks much better than you ever could." No one laughed this time. The music faded out, and in its place came a silence thick enough to choke on. Amelia's composure shattered the moment the room turned against her. She dropped to her knees, mascara streaking down her cheeks, her voice trembling between sobs. "Mom, please. I didn't mean to. I wasn't thinking." The words stumbled out desperate and hollow, like a confession made too late. The same lips that once spoke with sugar now quivered in panic. I looked down at her, not with anger, not even with satisfaction, but with the calm that only comes after a storm. "You don't need to mean it to show who you are, Amelia," I said softly, my voice steady and clear. "You've been showing it all year." My eyes held hers unflinching. The silence that followed felt heavier than any scolding could. She tried to reach for my hand, but I stepped back. There are moments when distance is the only mercy left. Henry moved next, his face red, jaw clenched. "Mom, that's enough. This has gone too far," he snapped, his voice shaking, not with courage but fear. He took a step forward, but before he could say more, another voice cut through the tension. From the back of the room, Mila rose from her chair. Until that moment, she had blended into the crowd, just another guest with a glass of wine and polite smile. But when she spoke, her tone carried the weight of authority. That video, she said firmly, and the documents you've all seen, they are legally verified and time-stamped. I personally certified the evidence. She looked at Henry and Amelia directly. If either of you tries to interfere or destroy this material, I will have no choice but to contact law enforcement immediately. The words hit like cold steel. Henry froze his breath, catching mid-argument. Amelia buried her face in her hands, her sobs growing quieter. Around us, the guests stood motionless, their earlier excitement turned to unease. Someone set down a glass too quickly. The soft clink of crystal echoed through the silence. The Christmas music that had been playing faintly in the background now seemed absurdly out of place. The scent of cinnamon and wine still lingered, but the warmth had left the room. I reached for my glass of red wine, holding it gently. My reflection shimmered in the ruby surface, calm and resolute. From now on, I said evenly, raising the glass, just enough for the light to catch, this house will not welcome liars. I looked toward the window where snow was beginning to fall, again soft and endless. Then I added almost kindly, Merry Christmas. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint clatter of a dropped ornament rolling across the floor. And for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. By morning, the silence that had settled over the house the night before was gone, replaced by the hum of a neighborhood that suddenly knew too much. Silver Pines had always been quiet, its residents polite but curious, and by sunrise, curiosity had turned into wildfire. The story spread faster than snowmelt elderly mother tricked by daughter-in-law exposes everything on Christmas night. It began on the church ladies' group chat. Someone had recorded part of the scene the moment Amelia's laughter turned into panic, the image of me standing by the fireplace, calm and unflinching. Within hours, the clip made its way into the Silver Pines Community Forum, then the town's Facebook page. By lunchtime, everyone in town had an opinion. That poor woman, someone wrote. Imagine being betrayed in your own home. Others weren't so gentle. If she can do that to family, what would she do to strangers? Amelia's name became a cautionary tale whispered over morning coffee and whispered louder at the grocery store. The same women who once envied her style now avoided eye contact in the aisles. Her face appeared in memes, screenshots, and gossip threads, frozen mid-cry, her hand clutching the gift box that held the truth. Mrs. Rhodes, once the loudest voice in every charity circle, vanished from public view. Her friends said she'd canceled her weekly luncheons and withdrawn from all committees. Pride can't survive exposure. It folds in on itself quietly. As for Henry, the news reached his office before he did. By the time he arrived Monday morning, the HR manager was waiting with a sealed envelope. We just need to discuss something, she'd said carefully, using the same tone people use with the doomed. They showed him headlines online, comments, screenshots from the video. His face drained of color. The letter he signed that day read, "Termination due to ethical misconduct and reputational damage." By evening, I could hear the echo of what they'd built, the house of illusion, crumbling beyond my walls. I didn't celebrate. I simply sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the snow fall over Silver Pines. The world has its own kind of justice, I thought. Sometimes you don't need to raise your voice. Truth travels faster than vengeance. The last snow of winter was melting on the rooftops, glistening like fragments of glass under the pale orange sky. I sat by the window hands, wrapped around a cup of tea, feeling the gentle warmth seep into my palms. Outside, Silver Pines was quiet again, peaceful, almost as if nothing had ever happened. But peace, I had learned, doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from reclaiming what was taken. The sunset reflected against the window pane, tinting everything in shades of gold and rose. My own reflection looked back at me, a face lined by time, but no longer burdened by shame or fear. There was a steadiness in my gaze that hadn't been there before, a kind of pride that didn't need to be loud. A knock at the door broke the stillness. When I turned, Mila was there, her coat dusted with snow. In her hands was a bouquet of white lilies, pure, simple, radiant. "For peace," she said softly, placing them on the table. Then she smiled, the way only someone who has seen both pain and justice can. "You know," she continued, "the whole neighborhood's still talking about that Christmas night. They say you were incredibly brave." I let out a small laugh, not bitter, just quiet. "Brave," I said, shaking my head. "No, Mila, I wasn't brave. I was just tired of silence." I looked back at the fading light outside. "Because when you stay silent too long, people start to think they can take your dignity piece by piece and call it love." Mila didn't argue. She only nodded her eyes, soft understanding. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The house smelled faintly of tea and lilies, and somewhere in the distance, the church bells of Silver Pines began to ring, slow, solemn, and full of grace. I lifted my cup, feeling its warmth once more. "Do you think they'll remember?" I asked. "Maybe not all," Mila said gently, "but the right ones will." I smiled then, not at the past, but at the quiet promise of what might still come. If you are hearing this story, if you have ever been dismissed, belittled, or made to swallow your tears in your own home, don't hide anymore. Tell your story. Let the world know that the wisdom, dignity, and peace of women like us can't be bought by sweet words or stolen through deceit. We've been silent long enough. Now it's time to speak and to be heard.